Occupation of Antarctica, Operation Backyard Cleanup. Sequel, Eternal Ice Hell. Prologue, The Ice Fields of Oblivion. The year is 2030. Several years have passed since the end of the Trump administration, and Operation Backyard Cleanup is beginning to be buried in the dark corners of history. The United States Southern Special Administrative District in West Antarctica still exists on official maps, but in reality, it has become a permanently contaminated zone solidified by the black residue of Venezuelan heavy oil. The former flagship, the USSV Meltorius, was forcibly rebranded as the Trump Antarctica Tower Hotel, only to be abandoned a few months after opening. The reason was simple: no one came, or more accurately, no one returned alive. However, the international community has a long memory, and the flames of revenge continue to burn. A lawsuit at the International Court of Justice, ICJ, led by Chile, Argentina, and environmental organizations, has finally begun its hearings. The central piece of evidence? Those clusters of Coca-Cola bottles. Meanwhile, environmental activist Greta Thunberg, now 28 years old and at the height of her sharp-tongued rhetoric, releases a final impeachment via X. Chapter 1. TripAdvisor Nightmares, a collection of Trump Antarctica Tower Hotel reviews. Since its launch, the hotel's TripAdvisor page has continuously hit record-low ratings. It sits at a forced one-star average with only 12 reviews, all from survivors. Below are excerpts. Review 1. Worst Vacation, Death Spa, by Frozen Tourist 2028, 0.5 stars. I booked this because I heard it was a luxury resort with geothermal spas, but when I arrived it was just the wreckage of an old warship floating in a sea of black sludge. Was the spa that oil-slicked heated pool? My skin started melting when I got in. Penguins broke into the room and took over the bed. Breakfast wasn't fresh seafood, but oil-soaked penguin droppings. -100 stars. It's a miracle I made it back alive. Review 2. MAGA's Graveyard, by ex-MAGAFan 2029. 1 star. I visited as a Trump supporter, but I have nothing but regrets. It was advertised as America's New Frontier, but the rooms smelled so strongly of oil I could barely breathe. The only view from the window was a wall of black ice. At night, packs of penguins would attack, screeching what sounded like MAGA. Hotel staff? There were none, just robots repeating "Make Antarctica Great Again." At checkout, the ship wouldn't move, and I had to escape via rescue helicopter. Never again. Review 3. Eco Horror Experience, by Eco Warrior 2030, 0 stars. I staying here for an undercover investigation, and this is a crime scene. The Tower Hotel is on the verge of collapse, with oil gel crawling up the walls. The wildlife welcome is real. Hundreds of oil-covered penguins wandering like zombies. The meal was a historic heritage menu, which was soup served in 1950s Coca-Cola bottles. The content was oil. This is a symbol of environmental destruction. TripAdvisor, delete this page. Chapter 2. The International Court of Justice, the Coca-Cola Bottle Evidence Farce. Location: the Great Hall of Justice, ICJ, The Hague. Date: June 15, 2030. Plaintiffs: Chile, Argentina, New Zealand, Coalition of Antarctic Treaty Nations. Defendant: United States, legacy of the former Trump administration. Presiding judge, solemnly: this case concerns the illegal occupation and environmental destruction of West Antarctica. Defendant, present your evidence. U.S. Representative Attorney, successor to Jack Stone, full of confidence. Your Honor, our sovereignty is historically proven. Look at these 1950s Coca-Cola bottles unearthed there. These are products of American culture, proof that Antarctica has long been a cultural extension of the United States. By the extended application of the Monroe Doctrine, it is ours by longitude. Plaintiff's attorney, barely suppressing a sneer. Coca-Cola bottles? That is just washed-up marine debris. It's not evidence, it's a symbol of pollution. The Antarctic Treaty prohibits sovereignty claims. Furthermore, your thermal geoengineering has permanently contaminated the ice sheets. The destruction of penguin habitats and the acceleration of climate change, this is a crime against humanity. Laughter leaks from the gallery. The judge strikes the gavel. Silence. Defendant, your rebuttal. U.S. side. The labels say Made in USA. This clearly shows Antarctica was America's backyard. Additionally, the hotel business is economic development and not a treaty violation. The penguins are happy. They're warm now thanks to the oil. Plaintiff's side. Happy? Endangered species are dying covered in oil. This is an environmental crime of genocidal proportions. The trial lasts for days, with piles of bottles submitted as evidence stacking up in the courtroom. Satirical cartoonists have a field day with the spectacle. Final verdict. The ICJ completely rejects the U.S. claims. It rules that Coca-Cola bottles are not evidence of sovereignty, but symbols of global pollution. The U.S. is ordered to perform decontamination and pay reparations, though the execution is postponed as it is deemed technically impossible. Chapter 3. Greta's Final Impeachment. A Storm of Ex-Posts. Immediately following the verdict, 28-year-old Greta Thunberg unleashed a relentless, biting critique on X. With over 1 billion followers, her post went viral instantly. At Greta Thunberg. Hey, you ghosts of Trump, you made Antarctica your backyard? Your backyard is a literal dump. Melting ice with Venezuelan oil and pickling penguins in it, you call that genius recycling? Don't make me laugh. The ICJ ruled those Coca bottles aren't evidence. They're embarrassment of your capitalism. You are the ones killing the planet by accelerating climate change. It's not how dare you, it's you are done. Give Antarctica back. What's next? The moon? You plan to pollute space too? The day will come when the penguins sue you. Hashtag climate justice now. Epilogue. The never-ending cleanup. The legacy of the operation lasts forever. The hotel ruins have become a sort of tourism resource. The trial set a new precedent in international law. Greta's post symbolizes a new era of environmental activism. As for Trump, he's busy on X promoting a Mars colonization plan. Antarctica was just practice. Next time, we're doing it for real. Hashtag MAGA in space.
All right, we're about to break down a really wild piece of speculative fiction called Operation Backyard Cleanup, Eternal Ice Hell. It's a satirical look at what happens when a political project goes horribly, horribly wrong in probably the most remote place on Earth. So let's just dive right in.
And really, the whole story hinges on this one simple question. It imagines a future where this grand gesture of national pride just completely collapses into an environmental catastrophe, one so bad that you can't ever undo it. Okay, so picture this. It's the year 2030. A controversial U.S. government project in Antarctica, with the very ironic name Operation Backyard Cleanup, has failed. And not just failed, it failed spectacularly.
It's left behind this permanent scar on the continent that people now call the eternal pollution zone. Right at the heart of this disaster zone, you've got this, well, this thing. It's a former military ship that was hastily converted into a luxury hotel. It was supposed to be a symbol of a new frontier, but it got abandoned almost immediately. And the reason is pretty simple. The guests literally could not survive their stay. And this brings us to the shocking accounts from the very few, very unlucky people who actually managed to leave a review of their experience. Let's take a look at what they had to say about this Antarctic nightmare. So the hotel's TripAdvisor page, well, it tells a pretty grim story. It has the lowest possible rating you can get, 1 star. But the truly chilling detail here is that those 12 one-star reviews, they come from the only guests who ever made it back alive. And the reviews are just as horrifying as you'd imagine. One guest, who goes by Frozen Tourist 2028, booked what they thought was a luxury spa getaway, only to find a toxic nightmare. The gourmet breakfast they were promised? Yeah, that turned out to be oil-soaked penguin feces. I'm pretty sure that was not in the brochure. Okay, next up, here's a review from a disillusioned supporter, username xMagaFan2029. They describe this completely surreal experience, everything from aggressive, politically charged penguins to the hotel's only staff member being a broken robot that's just stuck repeating a single campaign slogan. It's like a political horror story. And then finally, an undercover investigator confirms everybody's worst fears. They don't describe the place as a hotel. They call it a crime scene. The menu apparently featured soup served in a vintage 1950s Coke bottle, but the contents were just oil. This wasn't just a failed business. It was an active, ongoing environmental disaster. And this was the view that came with the reviews. Instead of pristine ice, guests looked out on a black, tar-like ocean. The local wildlife consisted of hundreds of oil-soaked penguins with these eerie, glowing red eyes, all perfectly framed by a sunken Coca-Cola sign. A true hellscape. So this disaster eventually sparked international action. Chile and Argentina led the charge, and the case was brought before the International Court of Justice. And the key piece of evidence? You guessed it, the very same Coke bottles that were found at the site. And this is where the story just pivots into pure satire. The entire court case really boils down to this one fundamental disagreement. The plaintiffs see the bottles as clear, obvious proof of pollution, while the U.S. defense team argues they're actually historical artifacts that prove ownership of Antarctica. You can't make this stuff up. The defense's arguments only get more bizarre from there. In an actual court transcript from the story, the attorney claims the oil spill is a good thing for the penguins because, it provides them with warmth. It's a statement so absurd it supposedly left the entire courtroom just stunned. So the court, they completely rejected the defense. In the ruling, the judges declared the Coke bottles a symbol of global pollution, not a deed of ownership. They ordered the U.S. to clean up the whole mess and pay damages. A clear victory for the environment, right? Well, not exactly. Here's the twist. While the court orders a cleanup, it also concludes that cleaning this eternal pollution zone is, and I quote, technically impossible. So the verdict is a moral victory, sure, but in practice, it changes absolutely nothing. The disaster is permanent. With the legal system totally powerless to force a real solution, the final verdict came from the court of public opinion. And, it was delivered by a now 28-year-old and probably even more furious Greta Thunberg. She takes to social media with this absolutely blistering post, calling the project a dumpster and declaring that the time for asking "how dare you" is over. The new message is simple and final. You are done. It's just a complete and total takedown of the entire project and its ideology. And the response was immediate and just overwhelming. Her post completely exploded, racking up 100 million retweets and becoming the definitive global statement on the whole fiasco. So, what happens after the trials, the reviews, and the viral takedowns? The story concludes by looking at the strange, permanent legacy of this Antarctic disaster. Well, 3 things endure. The ruined hotel becomes a kind of dark tourist hotspot. The court case, even though it's unenforceable, sets this powerful new legal precedent. And the architect of the whole disaster? Oh, he's already moved on, promoting his next big thing, a plan to colonize Mars. Hashtag MAGA in space. And the story's real satirical genius is in showing how these political narratives can get so detached from reality that people end up defending an oil-soaked hellscape like it's a national treasure. It leaves us with a chilling final thought, presenting this whole catastrophe not as a conclusion, but as a prelude. The final line forces us to ask, if this was only the practice run, what on earth, or off it, could possibly come next?
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're jumping into a story that, honestly, it feels like it's pulled from some near-future sci-fi novel.
But it's not. It's all rooted in the documented geopolitical and environmental catastrophe of the late 2020s.
We are talking about the complete and total collapse of Operation Backyard Cleanup.
Right. This was the project that was supposed to launch the, quote, U.S. Southern Special Administrative Region in West Antarctica.
Supposed to. Instead, it devolved almost instantly into this permanent ecological disaster zone. And it earned a nickname that you see everywhere in our sources.
Yeah. Eternal Ice Hell, a deeply, deeply unfortunate name.
So our mission today is pretty straightforward.
Mm-hmm.
We need to understand how this whole operation, which was really just a bid for a territorial claim using, cheap materials and even cheaper branding.
Right.
How did it crumble into this scene of extreme contamination? We're talking about solidified black hydrocarbon residue. And we also need to look at the bizarre legal and cultural fallout it left behind.
And our sources for this deep dive, they give us this really unique cross-section of what happened. We have these detailed accounts of the abandonment of the entire effort.
And these unbelievable survivor reviews from that luxury hotel they tried to set up there.
Oh, they're incredible. And on top of that, we have the official transcripts from the lawsuit at the International Court of Justice in The Hague.
And maybe most importantly, we have the viral social media commentary from this new wave of activists, especially Greta Thunberg, who really used this failure as a flashpoint in 2030. So let's unpack this.
Okay, so let's start at the site of the failure, because this operation was, it seems like it was doomed almost instantly.
It really was. They had this military vessel, the USSV Meltorius, which was supposed to be the flagship of the whole thing.
A spearhead. Right.
Exactly. And it was almost immediately rebranded in this just spectacular display of commercial hubris.
As the Trump Antarctic Tower Hotel.
That's the one. It was meant to be this beacon of America's new frontier, but as the sources confirmed, the failure was incredibly swift. And the reason given for its complete abandonment is it's chillingly simple.
Yeah, the sources say no one comes. Or, more accurately, no one returns alive.
And this is where the details get both absurd and genuinely terrifying. We actually found the defunct hotel's TripAdvisor page.
Only 12 reviews exist.
12 reviews, and every single person posting identifies as a survivor. They're all 1 star, of course, but the comments are it's a pure environmental horror show.
And those reviews, they give us this crucial, immediate insight into how grotesque the contamination was. The first major failure, it seems, was the promised geothermal spa.
The spa, right.
Reviewers describe this oil-slicked warm pool where the chemical concentration was so high that skin contact was immediately painful. One account from a Frozen Tourist 2028 just says, "My skin felt like it dissolved."
It's unbelievable. And the breakdown was just so total. It went down to the smallest details. Another person mentioned the breakfast.
The fresh seafood breakfast.
Which was apparently replaced with oil-soaked penguin feces, which... That detail, it doesn't just point to bad supply lines, it points to the complete disintegration of the entire local ecology in, a matter of days.
Within days, yeah. And then if you look past the immediate biological horror, you see the political failure captured perfectly.
Yeah, there's a review from a former supporter, username xmagafan2029.
And they complained the rooms were suffocatingly hot, coated in this greasy residue, and the only view was of these black, tar-stained ice walls.
I have to ask, was the plan really just to cover up the failure with branding? Or was there genuinely zero consideration for the environmental impact here?
Well, based on the details about the staff, the primary goal seems to have been ideological, just creating a permanent message.
The robot staff.
The robot staff, yeah. The most haunting detail from that review is that the automated staff, the only thing still running, just moved through the halls endlessly repeating one phrase.
Make Antarctica great again.
Over and over. It suggests the message was the only thing that mattered, even as the whole structure was basically dissolving into a contaminated shell.
And the contamination wasn't just, outside. An ego-focused reviewer described the whole hotel as a crime scene.
Yeah, noting that this viscous hydrocarbon gunk had actually started creeping up the walls of the building, almost like it was consuming it from the inside out.
The visual evidence you mentioned, it brings this hellscape to life. There's a picture, right? Taken through a rusty window frame.
It's incredibly stark. Outside, where you expect pristine white, there's just this dark, tar-like sea. And you can see hundreds of oil-covered penguins. The review calls them zombie-like.
And the oil contamination made their eyes appear red in the light.
Exactly. And the caption on that image just says it all. Ocean view, hellscape. That single picture basically shaped global opinion on the whole venture overnight.
And that profound environmental failure obviously couldn't be ignored, which brings us to the political and legal fallout.
Right. So on June 15th, 2030, a coalition of countries, Chile, Argentina, New Zealand, they filed a lawsuit at the International Court of Justice, the ICJ, in The Hague.
The charge was illegal occupation and environmental destruction, aimed squarely at the legacy of the former U.S. administration.
But before we get to the, let's say, creative legal defense, we should probably look at the specific contamination, because that really dictates why a cleanup was impossible.
Absolutely. The sources talk about thermal geoengineering combined with Venezuelan heavy oil. Why that combination? What made it so bad?
Well, heavy oil is just what it sounds like. It's crude oil with a very high viscosity, very dense. It's tough to transport and refine, which, made it cheap and abundant for a project like this.
So they went with the cheapest option.
The cheapest, most powerful option. The plan was to use it as a low-cost fuel for these huge melting efforts, the thermal geoengineering. But the problem is what happens when it leaks.
Which it did, catastrophically.
When it mixed with the freezing seawater and the ice, its high asphalt and metal content meant it didn't just dissipate. It solidified. It polymerized into that black, tar-like slurry we've been talking about. It became a virtually permanent pollutant.
So you can't skim it off the water or burn it off?
It's impossible. So they chose the most effective way to melt the ice, which was also the one guaranteed to create the most permanent, disastrous contaminant possible.
Unbelievable. So that sets the stage for the legal drama.
Precisely. The U.S. defense strategy was, it was to counter the environmental charges with this completely absurd territorial claim.
And this is where we get the infamous Coca-Cola bottle defense. I still can't quite believe this is real. They actually argued that finding old Coke bottles from the 1950s proved American sovereignty. Was that a serious defense?
It was an act of extreme legal provocation. The idea was to shift the whole debate away from contamination and onto this idea of historical ownership.
So what was the argument?
The core argument was that these bottles were artifacts of American culture, and therefore the continent was a cultural extension of the United States. They tried to justify it with this wildly expanded application of the Monroe Doctrine.
The Monroe Doctrine, that's a 19th century policy about European intervention in the Americas.
Yeah.
How on earth did they stretch that to Antarctica?
They tried to interpret it by longitude, arguing the U.S. sphere of influence just extend straight south across the ocean and happen to encompass that part of the continent. It was a desperate, transparent attempt to just ignore the Antarctic Treaty.
Which explicitly forbids territorial claims.
Explicitly.
The plaintiffs must have been stunned. How do they even begin to counter that?
They shut it down immediately. They argued the bottles were just marine debris. They reframed it completely, saying a bunch of old soda bottles isn't a symbol of culture. It's a symbol of global pollution.
So they turned the evidence right back against them.
Perfectly. And they escalated their own rhetoric, calling the contamination and the destruction of the penguin habitats a genocide-level environmental crime.
The sources even say the U.S. defense team doubled down, suggesting the penguins were happy because the oil was keeping them warmer.
A spectacular failure of basic empathy, yes.
So how did the ICJ rule?
The final judgment was unambiguous. The court completely rejected the U.S. claim, and they explicitly stated that the Coca-Cola bottles symbolized global pollution, not sovereignty. This was a huge global precedent, using debris as a legal marker of pollution, not ownership.
But the ruling also exposed the limits of international law, didn't it?
It did. The U.S. was ordered to pay reparations and clean it all up, but the court itself had to acknowledge that executing the order was technically impossible.
Because of the nature of that polymerized oil.
Exactly. So the order was effectively shelved. It ensured that the eternal ice hell would remain a permanent environmental monument to this whole disaster. A hollow victory, really.
And that ruling, that moral victory, combined with the physical impossibility of a cleanup, it became a massive rallying cry.
It really did. And that brings us to the cultural fallout, which was led by Greta Thunberg. She was 28 at the time, and she used that ICJ verdict for this enormous viral social media takedown.
And her audience at that point was what, over 1 billion followers?
Over 1 billion. Her post on X right after the ruling got 100 million reposts. This wasn't just activism anymore. This is a complete cultural indictment of a political legacy.
And what's so fascinating looking at the sources is the shift in her tone. It wasn't that passionate anger people were used to. It was something else.
It was extreme scorn. The source calls it a cold sneer. She had sort of moved past trying to motivate change and was now just declaring the whole system defunct.
Her post on X was just surgical. She refused to call it a backyard. She just called it a garbage dump.
And she mocked the choice of fuel, calling the use of Venezuelan heavy oil to melt ice genius recycling, just highlighting the absolute recklessness of it all.
And she didn't stop there. She went right after the legal farce, declaring the Coke bottles the shame of your capitalism.
And then, crucially, she codified this whole shift with her hashtag. She retired the classic pleading #HowDareYou.
And replaced it with the definitive, dismissive #YourDone.
That signaled a new, much less patient era of activism, and she ended with this powerful, almost prophetic threat. She just wrote, "Penguins will sue you next."
Which perfectly captured that sense of ecological justice that the courts couldn't deliver. And the whole thing was sealed by that viral image that went with it.
Oh, that meme was everywhere. It was her face with this expression of just ultimate contempt, utter cold dismissal.
And the background was a mashup of the disaster, right? The burning hotel.
The burning Trump Antarctic Tower Hotel, yeah, with the former president's silhouette shown fleeing the scene in a spacesuit.
And overlaid on the whole thing, the text, "Not in my Gallic XY." That image, it became an instant cultural touchstone. It was a generation just washing its hands of that entire political legacy.
So when you connect all these threads, what does this whole bizarre saga mean for you looking back? Operation Backyard Cleanup left behind, really, 3 indelible legacies.
The first one is the most obvious. The ecological legacy, that permanent contamination zone. The hotel ruin is now, weirdly, a kind of macabre tourist attraction.
A modern ruin. People go there specifically to witness the black ice hellscape.
Then there's the legal legacy.
Right. The ICJ ruling, even if it was unenforceable, set a critical global precedent. The court made it official. Corporate debris in a protected zone is a symbol of pollution, not a claim of sovereignty. It dramatically reinforced the Antarctic Treaty.
And third, the cultural legacy. The whole disaster was this failed attempt to claim territory using these outdated, almost colonial ideas.
The Stretch Monroe Doctrine, cheap branding.
And it backfired completely and ended up accelerating this new wave of radical environmental rhetoric, all symbolized by Greta's shift from pleading to just pure contempt.
At the end of the day, the Antarctic operation was a harsh lesson, a small-scale test case that showed everyone the dire consequences of unchecked ambition in these protected global zones.
But the truly provocative final detail from our source material is the ultimate deflection. While the world was grappling with the permanent mess he'd left behind, the central figure responsible for it all had already moved on.
He'd shifted his focus entirely, promoting a new, much grander goal on X.
Yeah. Instead of addressing the ICJ ruling or the disaster, his final public statement on the matter was a pivot to space.
The post read, "Antarctica was practice. Next time it's for real. I'm in space."
Which leaves you with this really unsettling thought of escalating contamination, right, from the backyard to the cosmos. A future problem built directly on the failures we've just explored. Something for you to ponder until our next deep dive.